Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome. Bruce, thank you very much for the introduction. I'm Bill Robson of the C.D. Howe Institute, and it's a great pleasure to be here, and it's a great pleasure for us at the Institute to collaborate with the Canadian Club. It has an extraordinary record as the top-ranked forum for public events and for eminent speakers. It's been a pleasure to work with the team, and Colleen, Kathleen, Carrie, Deb, thanks from all of us at the Institute. It's been great to work with you. And it's a particular pleasure to collaborate with the Canadian Club on this occasion, an address by Canada's Minister of Finance, Bill Morneau, and a special pleasure for me to introduce Bill. You'll have seen biographic information. You're here mainly because you're very interested in what he has to say as Canada's Minister of Finance. Since his election, over the 4.5 years since his election in October of 2015, Bill has been a pivotal figure in the federal government, its economic and fiscal policy, and we're all looking forward to hearing his thoughts about Canada's economic and fiscal challenges and how the federal government should respond to them. But before turning the mic over to Bill, let me just supplement a little bit of the biographical material that you'll have seen on the website and that you'll know about him. One of the things that I want to highlight, he had a terrific career in business, taking Morneau Chappelle from, boutique, is that fair, Bill? A boutique actuarial and benefits firm to the global company that it now is, providing human resources services right across the spectrum. He has a lovely family. And I know Nancy's here. I'm not sure where she is, but to go from that to public life, you have to seek a nomination, you have to get elected. Once you're there, it doesn't get any easier. The intense scrutiny, lots of people who think they know how to do your job better than you do. The intense schedule. Here we are on a Friday breakfast with 450 people. It's not quite like sitting across from Nancy on a Friday morning. It's a tough job, and in Canada we are very lucky to have people who will go into public life, make that choice as Bill has done, and I think we should salute that. I should also highlight that Bill is a very civic-minded person. He has been involved in the community in a number of ways, including St. Mike's. This is an incomplete list, but St. Michael's Hospital, Covenant House, and the Learning Partnership. And happily for us at the C.D. Howe Institute, he's been a supporter, he was a board member, and he was chair of the Institute's Board of Directors from 2010 until 2014. I got to work with Bill in that capacity, and I got a close-up view of many of the outstanding qualities that have made him successful in different walks of life. He's diligent, he's skillful with people, he's incisive with his questions, and he has a good sense of humor, very necessary quality in his current line of work. And it was another of the successes that Bill has supported over his career. The C.D. Howe Institute extended the scope of its work, a very solid performance, always ran in the black, and built up its strength to face whatever the future had in store. So I hope that's a good note, Bill. We very much look forward to hearing your thoughts. Thank you for being here. Everyone, please join me in welcoming Canada's Minister of Finance, Bill Morneau.
Well, thank you, Bill. Yeah, he didn't know whether it was an applause line to mention that the C.D. Howe was in the black and leave an inference there. I was trying to get us to invest in the future at the C.D. Howe Institute, and who knew? It's really a pleasure to be here this morning, and I want to start by thanking the C.D. Howe Institute and also the Canadian Club for hosting us this morning. I want to thank all of you for being here today to hear a few thoughts from my perspective. I'd also like to recognize a number of people that I've worked with in business, so many business leaders here, and some people that I've worked with in my more recent career as a politician. So Lisa Raitt is here. If I say anything partisan, you'll take it with a grain of salt. You're no longer in that world. Pierre Pettigrew, I see right here. Thank you for coming. I know Mayor Scarpetti from Markham is here, who's calling me about the importance of transit in the Greater Toronto Area, which I understand, and I understand Charles Sousa, who I worked with as the Ontario Minister of Finance, is here somewhere as well. So thank you, all of you, for being here, and certainly I have lots to talk about this morning. I started off thinking about this speech a couple months ago, and the idea was that I was going to talk about Canada's fiscal position and our upcoming budget. But as you can imagine, the world has changed. The world has changed pretty dramatically. So I want to talk about some of the immediate challenges that we're facing, how we're going to deal with those, and put those into the context of our broader economic situation. But I think I need to start with that broader context. It is important to recognize where we're at. The context going into this budget process is that, we're in a good position, and we're confident that our plan to invest in Canadians has been working. Our fundamentals are strong. If I bring you back to 2015, before Canadians chose our government to put investments in people at the center of our agenda, I was then the incoming Minister of Finance, and I saw a decline in trust among Canadians who were feeling squeezed after the post-2008 economic policies led to stagnating wages and slower than expected growth and rising costs of living. It's a challenge that we're seeing in many developed countries. Many Canadians were left with the impression that no matter how they worked, how hard they worked, they were feeling that they just couldn't get by. So we came in with an ambitious plan to invest in Canadians, to invest in the middle class, to create jobs, and to make sure that Canada was competitive. And I think the good news, based on where we've been over the last 4.5 years, is that the plan has worked. We've seen since 2015, through government investments and through Canadians, that we've been able to create over 1.1 million new jobs in our country. We have the and I think the lowest levels of unemployment that certainly I've seen in my working lifetime. Wages have risen, and over 1 million Canadians today have been lifted out of poverty over the last 5 years. So Canadians have benefited because we've rejected the idea that we should rapidly balance the budget on the backs of Canadians and to the detriment of the health of the economy. Instead, we decided to be bold and to use Canada's strong fiscal position to invest in Canadians and to ensure that everyone could benefit from strong economic growth. And I want to say that we did this while being fiscally responsible. Our fiscal position today remains very good. Our debt to GDP is on a downward track, and it's projected to continue out the length of the cycle. Our debt's a fraction of that of many other major industrialized nations, and I can tell you that this low debt advantage makes our balance sheet the envy of other G7 countries. The experts recognize our good fiscal position. Canada is only one of 2 countries in the G7 and only one of 11 countries in the world that has a AAA credit rating from all major credit rating agencies. So that's my frame. But as Minister of Finance, it's always important for me to make sure that we're prepared for what lies ahead. We have a solid fiscal and economic track record, but we can't let ourselves become complacent. We always need to be ready to respond to whatever may come our way. So that brings me to today. The COVID-19 outbreak has widened in recent weeks, intensifying concerns about the impacts on the global economy. The virus's impact on the health of Canadians is our top priority. We need to think, before we think about the economy, about the very real impacts on people, and that's what we are putting first. But from an economic standpoint, since January, we've been closely monitoring the coronavirus as well. From a health standpoint, though, that's been much more intense. Federal, municipal, and provincial health systems are coordinating, working vigilantly to protect Canadians. We're taking every precaution. The Prime Minister, most recently this week, created a cabinet committee, on which I'm playing a role, to ensure that we have a whole-of-government approach, leadership, coordination, and preparedness for a response to this health challenge, and look, importantly, towards the future and the economic impacts. My colleague Patty Hydew and the public safety or public health leader, Dr. Tam, have been working hard on this from day one. But we know that in the face of rising uncertainty, Canadian businesses and obviously workers and families are feeling particularly anxious. Although things are changing quickly, it's clear that the COVID-19 outbreak is going to impact the real economy. It's already impacted markets, as we've seen. Over the last few weeks, I've been in touch with my international counterparts. This is a global problem, and it requires international cooperation. When I was at the G20 meeting of finance ministers and central bank governors less than 2 weeks ago, I will tell you that it feels like a lot longer than that, we talked about the need to enhance global risk monitoring in the face of the COVID-19 challenge. On Tuesday this week, we had a call with the G7 finance ministers and central bank governors to discuss the potential for greater collaboration and coordination, where we reaffirmed our commitment to use all available policy tools to achieve strong and sustainable growth and to safeguard against downside risks, working together. On Friday, we had another call with the International Monetary Financial Committee to coordinate more broadly, recognizing that the risks from coronavirus are potentially even more challenging in countries with weaker health systems. And in a global system, that impacts all of us. On Wednesday, I had a call with my provincial and territorial counterparts to keep them up to date on international discussions, but also to discuss potential coordinated Canadian actions. And throughout this, I've been in touch with the heads of Canadians' financial institutions to talk about the state of our financial situation and with business leaders more broadly. You've seen that central banks around the world, including the Bank of Canada, have already taken action in response to risk to the economy associated with the outbreak and the uncertainty that it's creating. So what I can say is that while the full economic impact remains uncertain, the impacts on Canada and the rest of the world we see materializing through 4 main channels. First of all, we're already seeing the impacts on commodity prices, in particular on oil and metals. There are significant impacts on travel and tourism, as we're seeing travel disruptions, travel restrictions that are changing the situation for sectors like air transportation, retail, hotels, and restaurants. We're seeing important impacts on global supply chains, particularly on a supply chain that includes Asia in the mix. And we're seeing significant impacts on business and consumer sentiment globally. As you know, the situation is evolving, and it remains very dynamic. But it's important to note that the impact on Canada will ultimately depend on the depth and the length of the virus. The geographical spread is particularly important. And these things cannot be known until they're known. So our government is planning for every contingency. We stand ready to support Canadians and the economy as necessary in coordination with our provincial and territorial partners, as well as with our international colleagues. We're thinking about our response in 3 steps. Obviously, the first step has everything to do with health and protecting Canadians. And that is, in the immediate term, we are working to ensure that our federal public health capability to respond continues to be world-class. In the context of thinking about immediate issues, of course, we're soon going to be announcing support for Canadians who would have to be quarantined in order to prevent the spread of the virus. So those are immediate steps that we're working on. As a second step, I will tell you that we are continuing to monitor the impact on businesses and workers. And I will tell you that we have the tools to respond very quickly. As an important next step, I will tell you that as I'm preparing the budget for 2020, we're increasing our risk adjustment in that budget, the risk adjustment provision, to ensure that we're ready and able to respond. Nous réfléchissons à notre réponse en 3 étapes. La première étape, dans l'immédiat, c'est de veiller à ce que notre capacité fédérale de santé publique à réagir demeure de classe mondiale. Nous allons bientôt annoncer un soutien aux Canadiens qui doivent s'isoler afin de prévenir la propagation du virus. Dans le deuxième temps, nous continuerons de surveiller l'impact sur les entreprises et les travailleurs. Nous avons les outils pour répondre rapidement. Enfin, nous augmenterons notre ajustement en fonction des risques dans ce budget pour nous assurer que nous continuons d'avoir la capacité à réagir. We've also, of course, been taking action to address the economic impact of the blockades that we've seen over the last while. And I'll say that while it's too early for us to know the full impact of the blockades, we know they presented serious and significant challenges and frustration for businesses and for people across the country. Of course, we have to think about the many Canadians who depend on rail for necessities like food, the workers who use the train every day to get to and from work, and the workers whose jobs depend on our railroad sector. Thousands of workers were temporarily laid off. These impacts are real. Our government's been working around the clock to mitigate the economic risks of these blockades, but also to ensure that there's a lasting resolution. From the very beginning, we knew that we couldn't cut corners. We knew that dialogue, no matter how difficult, was the path that we had to follow. I know that many were critical of this approach, but we can now see that our approach has delivered results. Rail traffic is resuming. People who were laid off are being rehired. All of the blockades have been lifted. I want to say that the Prime Minister took the right approach, despite other politicians who were offering simple solutions to what is quite clearly a complex problem. And I want to say that if we must draw one lesson from the past few weeks, it's that the path towards reconciliation with Indigenous peoples is not linear. It takes dedication, hard work, and a recognition that there remains much work to do. It's a healing process that will see good and bad days, and we cannot lose our resolve in this. I also know that I couldn't come here without speaking about the immediate and long-term challenge of growing our economy while protecting our environment. We know that climate change is one of, if not the, defining issue of our time. That's why we've put in place Canada's first ever national climate plan. I will say that Canadians and governments alike are feeling the costs of climate change now. In the past 6 years, the federal government has spent more money, written more checks for flood relief and for fire relief from wildfires than in the previous 40 years combined. So it's not just the cost of disasters that we need to consider, it's also how we move towards a low-carbon economy that will reshape economies around the world, and that includes our own. We need to position Canada as a global leader. Canadian businesses already know that adopting better practices and exploring the new opportunities of a green economy will lead to success. In 2018, together with the Minister of the Environment, I launched an expert panel on sustainable finance to look at ways that Canadian businesses and financial institutions could address climate issues and capitalize on clean growth opportunities. We're working to ensure that businesses recognize the risk of climate change to their businesses, to their investors, and to their stakeholders. We know that we have to work with the sectors of our economy that are heavy carbon emitters. There's no path forward for Canadian businesses that doesn't include reducing their carbon emissions. Investors just won't be there. For the energy sector, we intend on working together on approaches that reduce emissions and create more economic opportunities for the workers and for businesses, including in the prairies. And that includes the federal government looking at investments that we can make to reduce our carbon emissions. It's critical that we create a path to fight climate change and protect our environment. So, we know that we've made significant progress since 2015 to build a strong and resilient economy, but we obviously know that more needs to be done, especially today. But the frame is important. We've been focused since day one on making smart government investments that will lead to growth. We did start by cutting taxes for middle-class Canadians, not once, but twice, the second being proposed as recently as this past December. The introduction of the Canada Child Benefit was critically important. We made sure more support was going to middle and low-income families so they could keep up with the rising costs of living. And today, 9 out of 10 families are better off as a result of this. That's millions of families with increased confidence to spend and save as they see fit. More than 300,000 children have been lifted out of poverty, exceeding our 2015 promise. We also increased the guaranteed income supplement, lifting 50,000 seniors out of poverty. But from business, the single biggest issue I hear from business leaders is the challenge in having enough talent. So we've increased Canada's immigration target by 30% over the last 5 years. So this is paired with renewed efforts to help attract and retain global leaders. And as you know, we've been investing significantly in infrastructure with a $180 billion infrastructure plan that is building infrastructure across a broad range of areas, like trade corridors, public transit, social and affordable housing. For businesses, we introduced an accelerated capital cost approach in 2018 to ensure that businesses could invest, and create jobs, and create growth in our economy. We've lowered the small business tax rate. It's now the lowest in the G7. The combined average income tax rate for small businesses is in a good place. When it comes to international trade, we've taken the opposite approach from most of our international peers. Rather than focus on protectionism, we've expanded trade through the new free trade agreements with the EU and Asia, through CETA and with CPTPP, and also the successful renegotiation of NAFTA. So I know it's a long list, and I think it's important, though, that we recognize that there's been a lot of work done in preparing us for challenges like the challenge we're facing today. So that has led us to our current fiscal position. And I think those interested in providing an honest assessment of our fiscal position would tell you that it's very strong. We have the lowest net debt among the major industrialized nations, and our net debt to GDP ratio is on a downward track. Basically, we have the very best balance sheet. So in looking at how we've got to there and the challenges we still face, we need to think about what we need to continue to do. In the years following the 2008 crisis, there was a broad sense of confidence at home and abroad that once the headwinds abated, that global growth would return to its pre-crisis levels and do what it basically done after every other major recession. But it didn't happen. Year after year, economic growth forecasts were revised down. The Conservative government at the time had an adherence to the notion that markets could solve virtually every economic program, that the gains from growth would trickle down and be shared by all. And importantly, the view was that austerity would be a path to prosperity. Well, as we know, the promised economic results didn't materialize. Middle-class Canadians did bear the brunt of that policy. So what I see is that not only did that not allow us to return to full employment as quickly as we would have liked to, but it also shifted the burden of macroeconomic stabilization policies onto monetary policy, which contributed to a prolonged period of exceptionally low interest rates. And this led to families having more debt and widened the gap between the wealthy and everyone else in our country. So, as you know, when our government came to office, we made the decision to use some of our considerable fiscal room to create growth for Canadians. And what people who criticize us for this policy are ignoring is that the global conditions changed over the period of the 2015 election to today. In particular, the price of oil, obviously one of our largest exports, has remained very low, resulting in significant adjustments to our economy. So we've continued to make investments to reflect economic conditions, support workers and their families in the prairies and regions that depend on oil and gas. We have and will continue to base our fiscal policy on a gradual reduction in the debt in relation to the size of the economy. And most economists who study this approach now agree with what we're doing, as does the International Monetary Fund. So having decided that fiscal policy should play a key role in stabilizing growth in an uncertain world, we then made important decisions on the appropriate mix of fiscal and spending measures. We took a pragmatic approach to deal with a weak level of demand, structural economic challenges, and alleviating household risk as fast as possible. And that's the frame for the actions that we've taken over the past 5 years. Helping families, investing in training, improving our infrastructure, enhancing the Canada Pension Plan, and opening new markets. Our approach means that we continue to have the necessary fiscal room to respond to whatever might lie ahead. As I've said, our fundamentals are strong. The unemployment rate is at the lowest level in more than 40 years. Wages are on the rise, and business profits are solid. People have more money in their pockets now than they did in 2015 to weather a storm. And by moving forward with our plan, combined with Canada's strong track record of economic resilience, we can expect that Canada will continue to prosper, even in the face of uncertainty. This is not to say that all is solved. The issues that I've been talking about are real, but I'm confident that our approach will continue to deliver results. The emerging challenges that I've outlined today show us why we need to continue to preserve the fiscal firepower that allows the government to protect Canadians and Canada from risks today and tomorrow. But I want to be clear, this for us is not an ideological choice between spending and cuts. It's about continued fiscal responsibility, fiscal management, while moving forward with a plan that has delivered a debt-to-GDP ratio that's lower today than when we started, all while helping Canadians to build a stronger country. Canada, more than any other country in the G7, has economic resiliency and fiscal firepower at its disposal. We intend on maintaining this advantage in this upcoming budget. It means we'll be judicious and responsible about how we make investments while continuing to show confidence in the economy that Canadians have built. Our approach will be practical and prudent, but squarely focused on making progress on the things that matter most to Canadians. Cela signifie que nous serons judicieux et responsables dans la façon dont nous investirons dans ce budget, tout en continuant à faire confiance à l'économie que les Canadiens ont bâtie. Notre approche sera pragmatique et prudente, mais visera à faire avancer les choses qui comptent pour les Canadiens. So we will continue on a course, a practical course that makes sense. As we face challenges that have real impacts on people's lives, our long-term economic planning has created the foundation for a strong and resilient economy, putting us in a position to respond to global or domestic challenges alike. I look forward to continuing this discussion with Amanda up here on stage. Thank you very much. Amanda told me I had to make it a little shorter because there's something she wanted to talk about on stage.
That's true. He was going to tell us what was in the budget, but I said, nah. Thank you. Nothing going on. As you allude, there are a whole bunch of issues that were already of serious economic import for Canadian businesses before COVID-19 landed on our economic shores and our health shores. I wanted to start there. I know there are a bunch of, as you say, known unknowns. Just give me a flavor, if you can, of some of the ideas being floated in that committee and on that call with other finance ministers, of some of the creativity you're bringing to this. What are some of the aggressive ideas? If this is a worst case scenario, what might you do so that the business community can take some relief in hearing your thinking?
It's an important question, and I think, what's the frame? I think we start with the frame that Canada is particularly fortunate that we have strong and coordinated healthcare systems across the country, and we're particularly fortunate that we have a very good fiscal position to respond. So that's a starting point. And the reason I start with health is that is the first thing that we're thinking about. We are obviously in a period where we have an extreme level of uncertainty. There's a risk of doing too little or a risk of doing too much, and we'd rather err on the risk of doing too much. And that's in particular around containment. So containment becomes the critical starting point because we're trying to make sure that our health systems don't get overwhelmed. So that's the work that Patty Hydew and Dr. Tam have been doing over the course of the last couple of months in very good coordination with other people around the country. So that's very positive. And thinking about next steps, as I mentioned, we need to think about ensuring that we have the capacity to do whatever we need to do in that first step. And that is details that we're working on right now. You know, I was with the Prime Minister for a number of hours yesterday working on this, and I know he's working with others of my colleagues at the same time. So making sure we have the absolute capacity to deal with that. Then we do need to make sure that the direct impacts on individuals and businesses as a second step are considered. It's a unique challenge in the sense that businesses are facing both supply and demand issues at the same time. So there's going to be reduced demand potentially, and there's certainly reduced supply already. So we are thinking about how we help from the business sector, and that's, as I mentioned in those remarks, something that we are very much on top of right now. We have tools that we've used in the past that have been effective, but we need to think about them on a broader scale. In terms of dealing with individuals, I mentioned just a small thing, like we need to deal with people who might immediately be off work because they are quarantined. But we need to think more broadly than that about protecting individuals. And then thirdly, beyond those things, there's the broader sense of what do we need to do to an economy if and when it faces challenges. I think we expect there will be challenges, but we can't expect or understand the magnitude. So we need to be prepared to think about those measures. And the context there is, first of all, as I said, we're going to take an additional provision for risk, recognizing the economic world that we're in is different than it was just a couple of months ago. And we're going to think about what are the ways that we might be able to use our fiscal firepower. I mean, you have a great balance sheet because sometimes they're rainy days. And, I'll tell you, the Prime Minister yesterday said to me, we're in a rainy day.
One of the things I think that people are hungry for is just simply an understanding of the roadmap. So just briefly, when you think about sort of containment, are there sheer numbers that you would share that if we hit X level of COVID-19 cases in Canada, schools are closed? I mean, can you actually give Canadians, and for businesses similarly, these are some of the things we'll do in advance of. Central banks have moved in advance of this. Should fiscal policy move in advance of it as well?
It's very dynamic. So I will tell you that we don't have any absolute marker, but you've watched other countries respond when they've seen things happen that are different than they might have expected the day before. So we are preparing ourselves for those eventualities. And I don't have trigger numbers, but I do know that we are and will continue to focus on being prepared. When I say we are, we still need to keep working every single day because it's so dynamic. So you will hear more from us next week on specifics that we want to make sure that we aim first and shoot after. So we want to get it right, but it will be in the very near term.
Are you talking to business leaders about what you would like to hear from them? In other words, loan forgiveness, periods of time when different rules may apply. You're sitting right beside Victor Dodig from CIBC. The banks could respond differently if people get offside of loans and credit situations. They could resist layoffs for longer than they might ordinarily. Are these conversations we should be having right now with the business community?
Well, first of all, I mean, you mentioned Victor from CIBC. I think we've been on the phone 3 times this week already. I've been speaking to all of the leaders of our banking sector, spoken to other business leaders, and of course we're listening for businesses' preparedness for this. So issues like working from home. So Victor's comment to me was that at CIBC they right now have 20,000 of their 40,000 employees who could work from home. So that's a measure that they're thinking about. And I'm sitting on the other side of Bell Canada. We need to recognize that the sense of importance of our telecommunication systems at a time when we need to be prepared for those sort of issues. So yes, we're asking businesses how they're preparing. In terms of the direct issues around credit and what businesses might face, we're preparing for that ourselves. We're thinking about things that have been done before, but we're thinking about those things in the context of potentially being different in magnitude. But I say potentially because we need to know the facts before we move forward. We need to understand sectorally where the challenges are happening. You heard what I was saying. I mean, clearly in the tourism and transportation and oil and gas sector, we're going to see impacts. We're already seeing some. But in some other sectors, it's about how broad this issue is and the length of this issue. So we're trying to calibrate our response based on different scenarios.
Before this potential crisis was upon us, Canada was grappling with some pretty serious issues of big, complex natures. And I want to start with the blockades. Where are we on resolution on that? Could they reappear, or are we done with blockades in this country? And as you answer that one, give me your letter grade on how your government managed that file.
I always wish when I was at university that people asked me to grade myself, because it would have been straight A's all the way. So let's just first answer the substance of the question. This has largely been resolved. I mean, the rail blockades are down. It was obviously a period of pretty intense discussions. Nobody can give us assurance that we won't have people in our country that will continue to have points of view that are different than the prevailing point of view. We live in a democracy. So I think that what we've demonstrated is that discussion can get us to a resolution, even of particularly difficult challenges. And this was a particularly difficult challenge where we were facing, different groups that had legitimate things to talk about and a perspective based on history and the approach to managing things that we had to recognize. So we will continue to accept different voices. We will continue to focus on dialogue, but also demonstrate, I hope, as we did in this one, that there's only so long that these things can go on. So will things like this happen again? I can't predict. I think that our approach that we've taken, for example, in the Trans Mountain Pipeline challenge of going out and listening, working together with Indigenous people to actually meaningfully understand their challenges and coming back with a solution, which was recognized by the Federal Court of Appeal of the right way to do things, is a demonstration of how we might get things done. And we need to stay on it. So, you asked me for a grade, I got to go with an A+. But I'll leave you to, if you want to mark me down a quarter of a grade point to an A, a little bit plus, that's okay.
I won't pull the room either.
Okay.
I'm not asking you, Lisa. Trans Mountain's an interesting...
But actually, it's worthwhile saying, I think Lisa Rate's in the room here, and I got to tell you that we watch politics, and it's people fight and there's partisanship, but beyond all that, I know that people like Lisa and others, they also recognize the importance of working together with Indigenous peoples to get things done. Right. We won't always agree on everything, but we'll certainly agree that you need to be practical, listening, and move forward in a way that's constructive. And so we're going to try and keep doing that.
I think... And I think the point is worth making, and Bill got us there, which is that nobody's in public life to do a bad job or not lead, and everybody is smart and well-intentioned. So with that context, these are big, complex issues, and simplifying them is a perilous, ridiculous thing to do. When we look at something like Trans Mountain, the federal government purchased that asset that should have cleared the way. There's no other organization, body in this country with more power and ability to get things done, and we still don't have a pipeline. So for business leaders, for investors outside the country, the message that sends has been a tough one. We know...
Yeah, so I don't buy that argument. So, we are working on this pipeline. We are actually building it as we speak. There are people putting pipe down. We are going to experience challenges in every project, because there will always be people who have a different point of view. We need to think about how we deal with that respectively. So I think there's this idea that we can't get things done. I would say there's always going to be political differences. We are at a moment where the challenge around climate change is so critically important to, I think, everybody in this room, that we're wrestling with issues. How do we do things responsibly? These are big challenges, but in the face of that, we purchased this pipeline. It's an asset that is important for Canadians. It's also one that will allow us to get resources to market economically, efficiently, and safely. And it is being built. And so all those people who say that it's not being built, it's not true. Anybody who says that we're not going to get it done, we're going to get it done, but we're going to do it in a way that's respectful in a democratic process. And will there be challenges? There will always be challenges.
It is at the center of this hugely important issue for Canada. The whole world is grappling with this issue of how we pivot from the old way of doing things, our carbon-based economies, to a new way of doing things. You're in the middle of it. Your government is going to be the government that began a process for our country for the next 100 years or more. What is the best way forward? Do we need a a summit, a royal commission, what is the way to bring Canadians together on this issue that will determine our path?
Well, you know, we all read the front pages of the newspapers and get a sense of what's going on, but what I can tell you behind the scenes is when I meet with people in the oil and gas sector, there is a sense of urgency around dealing with carbon emissions in that sector. There's a realization that investment dollars are not going to flow to projects unless they can show that they are responsible from a carbon emission standpoint. So I think we have every opportunity to work together to find a way to drive down carbon emissions. And I will tell you that the federal government is going to work together with the sector to think about how we can do that. Where can we make investments that, you know, whether they're in carbon sequestration or whether they're in the electrification of a grid or whether they're in, you know, small modular nuclear reactors, places where we can actually have an impact on our carbon emissions that require some additional investment to get us across, you know, a potential hurdle rate challenge that businesses have. So that is really important to us because the future of our country is going to include us addressing our carbon emissions. And we can't just say it. We need to step forward and figure out how to do it. And as we put together our carbon plan, our climate plan for 2030 and 2050, it will include those kind of investments that actually bend that curve downward. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but if any country, and you know, I said this to the G7 leaders, the finance leaders a couple of weeks ago, if any country can deal with this challenge, we can. We're at the front edge of this. We are a country that produces energy with a very progressive population that wants to deal with climate change. So you put those things together and it's combustible for sure, and we see that, but it also gets us to a potential solution that we could do that other people just might not have the same incentive to get there.
You will produce a budget that you say changes the risk assumptions because there are so many unknowns around what's coming. It seems, given that the global economy was relatively close to no growth the last couple of years, it slowed down in a material way. Global recession is a possibility here, albeit a short one. Are you willing to abandon fiscal anchors? How far are you willing to go to inject stimulus into the Canadian economy?
Well, let me talk about those three steps that I was identifying in my remarks. So I think in the first instance, we need to be dealing with our preparedness, and we cannot be penny wise and pound foolish in that effort. We need to think about how we ensure that we are prepared for this issue. Secondly, we need to keep our fiscal firepower ready for whatever comes later. So we've been doing that for 4 years. We need to continue doing that. So that means we need to carefully consider anything we're doing to make sure that we still have that capacity. So this idea of continuing to decline our debt as a function of our economy continues to be, and I would argue even is heightened in importance. And then there's a third step where, look, we have that fiscal firepower for a reason. Should we find ourselves in a challenging situation, we need to deal with it. So it's not being imprudent in any way in our budgetary decisions, but it's recognizing that we may need to make investments. And I want Canadians to know that we are ready and able to make those investments should the situations warrant. But the situations have to be analyzed. We're not going to do things without the facts. So as the facts on the ground are there, that's why we're preparing ourselves to potentially take action.
I think we're getting close to time here, but I know many in the room want to know the status of the trade agreement. When can we get that across the line?
So I think probably everyone knows that the Mexicans have ratified the new NAFTA and that the Americans have ratified it. It's before the House of Commons right now. We're going through our own parliamentary procedure. To the extent that you know members of Parliament that are perhaps not in the Liberal Party, you might want to say to them that this is quite important. I'm not looking directly at Linda, but you know. So all jokes aside, I think that we have a broad sense from parliamentarians that this is important for our economy, that this is important for Canadians, and we just need to get through the process. And we've identified to the Trump administration that we are working as fast as we can in this. I'm not joking. I mean, your advocacy as citizens is important, but I think that we are moving forward in a good direction to get this done soon.
All right. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Bill
Morneau. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. My name is Anita McCuitt, and I'm the President-elect of the Canadian Club of Toronto. And Mr. Morneau, on behalf of the Canadian Club, it was our honour to host you at our podium to share your government's economic plans with Canadians. In a time that's marked by uncertainty and angst around COVID-19, rail blockades, trade uncertainty, climate change, it's important to know that we have plans to respond and advance Canada's economic standing in the world. And in the days leading up to International Women's Day, I'd also like to acknowledge the work that you've done to help advance gender equality. The groundbreaking, The groundbreaking Gender Results Framework, introduced in your budget in 2018, supports gender equality in important ways, including women's economic participation and prosperity. So thank you for joining us this morning. We wish you every continued success. We're immensely grateful to have had the opportunity to partner with C.D. Howe Institute today for this breakfast event. And one last thank you to our sponsors, Bell, CIBC, Deloitte, Manulife, and Power Corporation, and to VVC, our incredible AV partners. Thank you all for joining us this morning, and hope you have a wonderful day.